There is an absolute disaster currently unfolding right before our very eyes in the professional basketball playoffs, and it involves one of the most baffling coaching decisions we have witnessed all season long. The Boston Celtics completely fell apart down the stretch in Game 5, suffering an incredibly demoralizing 113-97 loss to the Philadelphia 76ers directly on their own legendary home floor. This was absolutely not just a simple frustrating loss, but rather a complete and total catastrophic collapse in the final 12 highly critical minutes of postseason action. The visiting 76ers entirely dominated the crucial fourth quarter, physically outscoring Boston by a massive margin of 28-11 exactly when the overall competitive pressure was at its absolute highest peak. There are truly countless glaring issues that frustrated passionate fans and highly paid television analysts can easily point to when desperately dissecting a monumental late-game collapse of this unbelievable magnitude. You could easily look closely at the heavily tired legs of the exhausted franchise superstars who were forced to carry the entire heavy offensive burden for 3 grueling quarters. You could aggressively point out the complete lack of basic defensive rebounding that constantly allowed the opposing team to secure incredibly crucial second-chance opportunities and extra offensive possessions. You could deeply analyze the completely stagnant, predictable offensive sets that routinely resulted in highly contested, incredibly difficult late shot clock heaves that violently clanked off the iron rim. However, there is one highly specific point of absolute fascination and pure unadulterated frustration that is currently completely dominating the intense post-game conversations across the entire professional basketball world. That specific glaring tactical issue is the entirely inexplicable and completely baffling lack of crucial playing time for dynamic explosive guard Payton Pritchard during the absolute most critical closing moments of the entire season. On a highly stressful night when the entire Boston offensive system was visibly coming completely apart at the seams and desperately crying out for a spark, their clear third-best offensive player was inexplicably glued to the cold bench wearing his warm-up jacket. We are actively talking about an incredibly highly confident player who was coming completely fresh off an absolute 32-point offensive masterpiece in the previous game, where he literally single-handedly saved the entire team from total disaster. Despite possessing that massive, undeniable momentum and carrying the absolute hottest shooting hand in the entire arena, Payton Pritchard played a highly disappointing and strictly limited 26 total minutes in Game 5. Even more absolutely baffling and entirely inexcusable to anyone who truly understands the basic fundamentals of offensive basketball is the undeniable fact that he did not even officially enter the basketball game in the final frame until there were strictly under 5 minutes left on the giant scoreboard clock. By the precise agonizing time the stubborn coaching staff finally decided to swallow their pride and put their absolute best offensive creator back onto the hardwood, the game was already entirely out of reach, and the catastrophic psychological damage was completely done. It was an absolute head-scratching tactical decision from head coach Joe Mazzulla, primarily because the Celtics were visibly struggling on national television to do absolutely everything fundamentally required to actually win a highly competitive professional basketball game. The entire roster was entirely struggling to seamlessly move the heavy basketball from side to side, to constantly shift the opposing defensive shell. They were heavily struggling to actively move their feet without the basketball entirely failing to utilize basic backdoor cuts or simple off-ball screens to creatively generate wide-open driving lanes. They were completely failing to aggressively penetrate the painted lane off the dribble to successfully collapse the opposing defense and force highly difficult rotational decisions. And perhaps absolutely most importantly, they were entirely failing to actually hit completely wide-open jump shots when they miraculously managed to briefly find them. Absolutely all of those highly crucial offensive actions are the exact specific basketball things that Payton Pritchard is quite historically great at, effortlessly executing on a highly consistent nightly basis. He is an absolute masterful maestro at entirely changing the entire overall pace of the basketball game, utilizing his incredible blinding lateral speed and his incredibly tight low ball handle to easily navigate right directly through the incredibly dangerous teeth of absolutely any elite defense. And it is absolutely not like he was playing poorly during his highly limited time on the floor, or did absolutely anything specifically negative to deserve being abruptly pulled completely out of the primary closing lineup. Despite having a highly uncharacteristic and slightly frustrating shooting night, From completely beyond the perimeter arc where he shot just 1 for 5 from deep three-point territory, Payton was still miraculously the clear third leading scorer for the entire Boston team, finishing the grueling night with 12 incredibly crucial hard-earned points. Furthermore, he was the absolute undisputed primary leader in overall elite playmaking for the entire talented roster, finishing the highly physical game with a team-high 6 beautiful assists. He efficiently shot a very solid 5 for 10 from the overall field, entirely proving, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was easily getting directly to the basket absolutely at will against the significantly larger Philadelphia perimeter defenders. He was constantly utilizing his brilliant, unique craftiness and his excellent, highly advanced footwork to completely break down his primary defender and successfully finish highly difficult, acrobatic layups in very heavy interior traffic. To absolutely top off this incredibly frustrating statistical narrative, the Boston Celtics were actually a mathematically positive 8 points in the highly scrutinized plus-minus category during the specific 26 minutes he was physically allowed to be on the floor. That positive 8 rating is a complete massive statistical outlier, compared directly to the absolute rest of the entire starting rotation on a brutal night, when Boston ultimately lost the game by a staggering 16 total points. When a basketball player is a positive 8 in a highly demoralizing 16-point blowout loss, it mathematically means the team was completely getting destroyed and massively outscored by 24 total points during the specific 22 minutes. That specific player was sitting entirely helplessly on the sidelines. For him to get this highly limited, unfair amount of run in a crucial, pivotal playoff game is completely baffling and entirely inexcusable from a professional tactical coaching standpoint. The historic narrative days of viewing Payton strictly as a traditional limited sixth-man microwave scorer, who simply comes into the game to blindly shoot a few quick, contested jump shots and immediately sit back down, are completely long over. While he may still technically start the basketball game completely off the bench due entirely to traditional, stubbornly held rotational hierarchies, it might finally be the exact perfect right time for that outdated, rigid philosophy to entirely change forever. He has completely organically developed through pure, relentless hard work into a leading primary foundational engine of this entire complex offensive system. He brilliantly dictates the overall tempo, he loudly organizes the complex half-court sets, and he consistently provides the exact chaotic, aggressive rim pressure that perfectly opens up the perimeter line for the superstar wing players to easily operate. The coaching staff absolutely needs to demand and expect highly consistent major production out of him in order for this specific roster to truly operate as an elite, unstoppable, championship-caliber offense. It is completely clearer right now than it has ever been, at absolutely any point in the entire long season, that with starting veteran guard Derek White currently heavily struggling with his overall outside shooting confidence, Joe Mazzulla and the entire highly paid assistant coaching staff desperately need to finally wake up and smell the coffee. They absolutely must truly understand that Payton is a completely massive foundational core part of this specific championship window, and they must immediately begin to actively treat him accordingly before the entire promising season violently slips away into the dark abyss. He can absolutely still come quietly off the bench if the coaching staff desperately wants to preserve the traditional starting lineup continuity to protect fragile veteran egos, but he absolutely desperately needs to be consistently playing 35-plus minutes on a nightly basis, especially during the highly physically demanding and mentally grueling playoffs. The team desperately needs his constant, relentless ball pressure and his elite offensive half-court creation, especially when the entire exhausted roster is completely dying for absolutely any sort of offensive spark, exactly like they clearly were during that catastrophic fourth-quarter collapse in Game 5. If you are truly enjoying this incredibly deep tactical dive into the massive rotational mistakes of the Boston Celtics, please take a very quick second right now to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can absolutely keep bringing you this highly detailed daily playoff coverage as the intense series inevitably moves forward. Looking deeply back into the highly storied recent history of this legendary franchise, Payton has practically always been unfairly forced to sit quietly and patiently behind a pair of highly elite, highly paid veteran guards in the city of Boston. He patiently waited his turn without ever complaining to the media when the roster actively featured Kemba Walker and Marcus Smart completely dominating the primary ball-handling duties. He continued to wait completely professionally like a true highly dedicated soldier, when the rotation violently shifted to heavily feature Smart and Derek White, entirely running the offensive show. He consistently kept his head completely down and worked absolutely relentlessly on his personal craft behind closed doors when the aggressive front office officially brought in Drew Holiday to pair heavily with White in the starting defensive backcourt. It absolutely takes an incredibly massive amount of pure mental fortitude and elite psychological toughness to successfully survive being completely buried deep on the bench for multiple consecutive years without ever aggressively demanding a trade or entirely losing your passionate competitive fire. But absolutely all of that incredible patient waiting has finally completely culminated in this exact highly critical moment. Because right now, Payton is undeniably the absolute clear number 2 overall guard on this entire expensive roster in terms of pure overall offensive impact. You can very easily confidently argue with a straight face that he is actively the absolute number 1 most highly important guard on the entire team right now, when it completely comes strictly to the offensive side of the basketball floor. He simply flawlessly provides a completely unique, highly explosive skill set of incredibly rapid burst, deep, limitless shooting range, and completely fearless rim attacks that absolutely nobody else on the roster can consistently replicate on a nightly basis. While he admittedly has absolutely not been entirely perfect throughout absolutely every single minute of this current highly physical defensive series, he has undeniably still been the absolute clear third best player completely wearing a green uniform overall. It is absolutely not a random crazy statistical coincidence that the exact 2 highly specific games where he has actually played the absolute fewest total minutes in this entire unpredictable series directly heavily correlate with the exact 2 games the Boston Celtics have ultimately completely lost. That is an incredibly massive, glaring mathematical warning sign, completely flashing in bright neon red lights right directly in the face of the entire stubborn coaching staff. The advanced data and the pure eye test are explicitly loudly telling them that when they artificially restrict his total playing time, the entire team fundamentally struggles to maintain their necessary offensive efficiency and ultimately painfully loses professional basketball games. There is miraculously still a tiny sliver of time for this highly frustrating, deeply flawed rotational philosophy to entirely change, but it absolutely undeniably has to happen right now, immediately before Game 6 officially tips off. There is absolutely zero margin for physical or mental error remaining in this highly stressful, pressure-packed post-season run. Payton absolutely needs to be fully treated entirely like a highly respected complimentary star, completely alongside the massive franchise cornerstones, rather than constantly being treated like a highly disposable, incredibly situational role player, trapped on a ridiculously short, physical leash. Outside of the 2 massive superstar franchise pillars in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the incredibly dynamic backup point guard absolutely desperately needs to be actively seeing just as much playing opportunity and total offensive usage as absolutely anyone else on the entire roster moving forward. The Boston coaching staff must completely throw away absolutely all of their incredibly stubborn, preconceived traditional notions about basic player roles, and finally fully embrace the absolute undeniable reality that Payton is the exact crucial key that completely unlocks their absolute ultimate championship potential. When you closely examine the specific physical biomechanics of his highly advanced step-back jump shot, or his incredibly explosive first step attacking the closeout, you quickly realize he possesses elite foundational traits that are normally strictly reserved for absolute max contract franchise players. His incredible pure ability to completely stop on an absolute dime, entirely manipulate the opposing big man perfectly in the dropping pick and roll coverage, and smoothly elevate for an incredibly highly contested jumper is completely unmatched by absolutely any other guard currently residing in the Boston locker room. By actively choosing to deliberately keep that incredibly potent offensive weapon completely holstered on the bench, while the entire team slowly, violently bleeds to death offensively in the fourth quarter, the coaching staff is actively choosing completely predictable stubbornness entirely over actual winning basketball. If they absolutely refuse to make this incredibly obvious, highly necessary tactical adjustment, and instead completely continue to leave their absolute most dynamic offensive initiator completely rotting away on the silent bench during the absolute most highly critical closing moments of the entire game, they will inevitably have absolutely nobody to rightfully blame but themselves when they are painfully forced to abruptly pack their bags and head entirely home incredibly early for a highly disappointing and completely miserable summer vacation. The specific historic time for absolute stubborn blind loyalty to highly struggling veteran players is completely totally over, and the incredibly urgent time to finally fully unleash the absolute best, most highly lethal version of this dynamic offense is right now, immediately. The entire passionate Boston fan base can easily see the highly glaring, completely obvious truth staring right back at them through their television screens. And now the entire basketball world is simply waiting anxiously to see if the highly paid coaching staff will actually finally completely wake up, immediately smell the rich coffee, and ultimately properly respect the absolute, true, sheer, undeniable greatness of Payton Pritchard.